People online are outraged following a new report that student loan servicer Sallie Mae had decided to reward some of its employees with a trip to Hawaii in order to celebrate a record year of profit. So they had made actually about $5 billion. And now let's go to a quote here from Ray Quinlan, the CEO of Sallie Mae. He said this, quote, "Hey, look, Maui's a pretty nice spot. And so if you wanted to stay a few days and wanted to bring family, that's up to you." And he said that the news trip, or he told NBC News, the trip was in part to celebrate a record year of $5 billion in what he called sales. So now, what he calls sales, and if you're not familiar with what Sallie Mae does, they're essentially a student loan servicer. Okay, so these are the people that either manage or loan out money to students, to prospective students, so that they can get a higher education and then often charge high amounts of interest on the payments of which they get back. And I'll give you a story on how bad that can actually be. So now, again, what he calls sales are people getting into massive debt for arguably decades, 10, 20, 30 years, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in debt. They get into that debt in order to try to create a better life for themselves through higher education. Now, these borrowers, who, by the way, owe collectively billions of dollars, and when it comes to federal student loans, $1.6 trillion, not to mention, like I said, the private loans that are involved, and this is what part of this is as well, they're not happy about this. So now, one example here is Paige McDaniel. So she's 39 years old, and she took out a federal Sallie Mae student loan in order to pay for her undergrad degree 20 years ago. So this wasn't just now. And this is while Sallie Mae was still one company. Then they spun off into Navient as well, which is my current student loan servicer, by the way. Now, 6 years later, before the Sallie Mae split with Navient, she had taken out a private loan with the company to pay for grad school. Now, she thought, because it wasn't clear, that they were the same kind of loan, that federal student loans and private loans were essentially the same. So when you get into the details, you realize that, no, they're not quite the same. Now, she said she borrowed about $120,000 for her tuition at Lakeland College for a master's in business administration and to help with the cost of living as she worked through school. Now, the agreement, which included a warning to read it before signing, said the interest rate was variable. But she says she doesn't remember being told that the rate was much higher on the private loan. And so, look, there's a lot of things to read through. There's a lot of things to consider. And if you're young, or if you're not exactly savvy with money, there is a way that they can prey on people with, intentionally obtuse and clouded language. And so you don't necessarily know what you're getting into. And so you could say, well, that's her fault. Maybe she should know more. Maybe she should know better. And then there's the other side that says, yeah, but these companies put it up in such non-plain language, such complicated language, that it really makes it difficult for you to know exactly what you're getting into. And considering how most people who take out student loans are usually fairly young at the time, in their late teens or early 20s, when they don't have as much life experience, you're not exactly taught about variable interest rates in high school. You taught how to, interestingly enough, square dance, but that doesn't seem to have helped me very much in my life. But doing taxes, a class on taxes would have been great, or on doing bank loans. But nonetheless, a lot of these people don't have this education. They don't really know. Ironically, they're going to try to get that education, so they don't know exactly what they're getting into. And so that can be quite a bit of a problem, right? And so now after graduation, Sallie Mae expected McDaniel to pay about $1,500 a month in student loan servicing. Now, she had a problem. She couldn't afford that. She's like, wait, I can't afford that. Can we make a payment arrangement? So that sounds reasonable, right? In federal student loans, for example, they allow for income-based repayment plans. So if you don't have that amount of money, you're able to work with your servicer to get a lower payment. Now, that does extend the life of your loan. That also nets them quite a bit of interest. And so that's another problem as well, which is why if you can, make the highest amount of loan payment you're able to make. in order to get that down because they will destroy you with interest. Nonetheless, she says, I can't afford to pay $1,500 a month right now. Can we work something out? Can I get on some sort of payment plan? Sallie Mae said, absolutely not. We will not do that. In fact, here's what they said. So sorry to hear that you can't pay. I guess we'll just have to put a lien on your house and garnish your wages if you don't make those payments. Wait. Oh, no, we'll take your house and we'll garnish your paychecks just to make sure that you pay back that loan, even though she is more than willing to make a payment arrangement. And by the way, with the interest that they charge, Sallie Mae would end up making more off that loan even if they had smaller payments per month. Disastrous. And so now, for $120,000 that she had borrowed, McDaniel owes a total of $304,000 in student loan debt. At more than doubled. You've got to be kidding me. Again, 14 years ago, she took out $120,000 loan with Sallie Mae. And still, $304,000 because of the interest. Even trying to make payments, that interest, I mean, again, it makes even if you're making these payments, they still end up being more. And so that's the predatory trap that millions of people have found themselves in. And now, what's different between federal student loans and private loans, and you can thank Joe Biden for this, is that federal student loans are not dismissible in bankruptcy. Private loans are, so this was a private loan. And so what she did is that she declared bankruptcy in order to save her house. She couldn't afford the payments. They wouldn't work with her. She wanted to save her house. And so she declared bankruptcy. And apparently, Sallie Mae has refused to discharge the loan. $304,000. McDaniel said this, quote, "There's no way anybody could ever dig themselves out from underneath that." Well, I don't know. You should talk to those executives that are living it up in Maui right now. I'm sure they could dig out of that. $5 billion worth in quote-unquote sales. Jeez. Now, again, I know conservative reaction to this will be like, well, you shouldn't have taken the loan out in the first place. Ha ha, loser. What are you going to do now? I know, right? But look, here's the thing. Conservatives, they don't understand that education was supposed to be the great equalizer. And that a lot of us with the student loan debt, we were essentially sold a lie. An absolute lie. Go to college, get a good job, make lots of money, and then you can repay your loans. Oftentimes, people signing up for college, they don't know about variable interest rates and et cetera. And so they also don't know about predatory private student loans. And by the way, this is an example of one. Ashley Harrington, Senior Policy Counsel at Student Debt on the Nonpartisan Center for Responsible Lending, said this, quote, "We worry about private student loans. They don't have the same protections for borrowers that federal loans have." And Harrington points to private student loan companies that often employ subprime lending practices. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because that's part of what crashed the economy back in 2008, except it didn't have to do with subprime student loans, but it was subprime mortgages. And so they would loan out money to people who had no ability or expectation to be able to pay it back. And of course, this generally, disproportionately affects Black, Latino, Native American, and female students. Black undergrads with debt are unable to afford their loans at 5 times the rate of white bachelor degree graduates, according to a study done in 2019, done in part by the CRL. So you have loans out there that are incredibly predatory. So now the news comes out, and now there's a lot of outrage when it comes to social media. In fact, Sallie Mae is actually trending at the time of this story on Twitter. And so here's what some of the people were saying. Monster Keneally says, didn't we taxpayers bail out Sallie Mae 10 years ago? And now they can afford to send their employees to Hawaii to celebrate? That doesn't seem right. Chuck says, Sallie Mae said, F them kids. Eli in Retrograde says, how many signatures do I need to petition to launch every single exec at Sallie Mae into the effing sun? There's even politicians that got into it. Representative Joe Cunningham said this, student loan debt is an albatross around the neck of millions of Americans, pushing the American dream further and further out of reach. Sallie Mae execs are literally vacationing off their struggle. Something's not right with this picture. I agree wholeheartedly, which is why I'm glad that there are policies out there to address this issue. Pay Resist says, sales makes it seem like the people buying Sallie Mae's product had an actual choice if they wanted to afford an education. Because, of course, education here in America costs so incredibly much, it is prohibitive to anyone except for the non-rich. And finally, Ben Kesslin says, as 1 in 5 adults wonder how to pay off their $1.6 trillion in student loan debt, Sallie Mae execs wrestled with a different question. How should they spend their downtime on their paid trip to the Fairmont Resort in Maui? And it really kind of shows you the two different worlds that we tend to live in. There's the haves, the world of the haves, and the worlds of the have-nots. Now, I think student loan debt shouldn't exist, period. We shouldn't have to pay enormous sums of money and get into debt for the next 20, 30, 40 years in order to get an education. That shouldn't be a thing, but it does. But it is a thing, and it does exist here in America. Now, there are 2 presidential candidates right now that do have a bit of a plan to deal with it. So now Elizabeth Warren, let's go to her plan first. She basically wants to forgive some of that student loan debt. Hey, that's a start. Now, the plan would heavily rely on means testing because, as they say, well, we don't want billionaires having their debt forgiven. Now, tell me what billionaire or millionaire takes out debt to go to college or to send their kids to school? Nobody. Yeah, you can't come up with that answer. So now there's another plan. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders says, let's not deal with any of that. No means testing. Let's just take this debt and throw it in the garbage. We're going to cancel all $1.6 trillion of student loan debt. And, by the way, ensure through free college that no one ever has to deal with the burden of student loan debt ever again. I will leave that up to you, which plan you think would be best to solve this problem. But it is a problem. We need to address it. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.